Hello, good afternoon. I'm Louise Rowland, Deputy Chief Executive of UFI, and welcome to the final event in the Week of VocTech 2021. And what a week it's been for all things tech and learning. The EdTech Summit, the AoC Conference, and of course the Learning Technologies Awards on Wednesday night. And I've really enjoyed listening and watching to the discussions, the debates, and the commentary on social. If you've missed something, don't panic. All of the Week of VocTech content will be available for you to digest very, very soon. So on to this afternoon's session. It brings together some of the themes that we're really passionate about at UFI. The potential of tech used in the right way to increase opportunity, parity, and equity of access to skills, and thus transforming the lives of many. And the issue of access to opportunity is at the heart of the discussions around how to catch up lost learning. We know that every learner has been impacted in some way. We also know that some groups of learners have been impacted to a greater degree. We also know that if we don't do something about this, we'll be fostering a generation who are least likely to engage in lifelong learning as adults. And the implications of this are stark. The recently published Adult Participation in Learning survey from the Learning and Work Institute showed that those most likely to benefit from learning, socially, economically, in terms of health and general well-being, are least likely to engage. Not only is this bad news for the learners themselves, in the face of UK skills gaps, this is bad news for employers who are desperate to access this latent talent. So whilst there are these challenges, the pandemic has also created a momentum across the UK in colleges around the deployment and adoption of tech. And at UFI, we're really privileged to see an awful lot of this through the projects that we support through our grants and our ventures. Our VocTech Now COVID response scheme supported 10 colleges across the UK to really rapidly adopt and deploy digital tech in the immediate aftermath of the first lockdown. So the question today really is how do we build on it, and how do we build on this momentum and use what we've learned to really support learners, teachers and trainers. So I'm really, really excited to be here on a Friday afternoon with a group of people who are really passionate about taking these issues seriously and to explore how tech, done well, can really help overcome some of these problems. So I'd like to welcome onto the stage David Cork, who's Director of Education and Skills Policy at the AoC. And I have to say, David's looking very fresh after the AoC conference this week. Scott Hayden, who's Digital Innovation Specialist at Basingstoke College of Technology. Hi there. Karen Spencer, who's Principal and CEO at Harlow College. Karen's also part of the Four Nations Leadership Group with principals and government and membership bodies across the UK. And finally, Bob Howe. Bob's Head of Education Platform at the software company Advanced. Hi, afternoon, everyone.
Hiya.
So to kick things off, we're going to hear from David and Bob, and they're going to share a few stats and insights to help us understand the landscape and what's going on in the context of lost learning. I should be keeping them to time and we'll have plenty of opportunity for questions. And I'd really love to hear whether what they are talking about and what they explain really resonates with your experience. So please do pop your questions, your thoughts, your comments in the chat. And then we're going to move on to a discussion to explore, practically how tech can help solve some of these challenges in college, drawing on the experience and the insights of the panel. So my hope is that at the end of the session, we'll have some really great insights in terms of the issue, but also some shared experience and insights around what we can do and how tech can be deployed to help tackle some of those. So without further ado, we should send you over to Bob and David, who will share some thoughts and insights on what's going on. What does the picture and the landscape look like? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Louise. So we're going to go through, as you said, some detail in terms of the stats, and hopefully that will give us the context for when we hear from Karen and Scott later in regards to the richness and colour of what's actually happening on the ground. So this is some research we did for DFE to inform spending review bids to try and help fund and support the education recovery plan or support with lost learning. So hopefully the context will take us into a lot of areas of discussion, and hopefully we'll see that it's not just about maths and English lost learning, not just about subject lost learning, but all that social lost learning that we've seen. So next slide, please, Bob. So in terms of lost learning, lots of people have said, organisations have said that COVID will cost us lots as individuals. So it will cost children 350 billion in earnings due to lost learning. This includes 100 billion on lost tax revenue. There was a famous sort of failed recovery package that was costed at 15 billion. Prior to SR, 1.4 billion had been committed, and recently we've had 800 million committed to SR for recovery for 16 to 18 learning only. So that's an extra 40 hours or an extra hour per week. So a fairly big commitment. And just to make a positive start, I mean, the SR package was one of the biggest packages that FE has had for over 15 years. So I think we really should be looking at it in a positive way, and the education recovery is a big part of this. Still, obviously, US and others are making really big commitments around education recovery. So next, please, Bob. So the first thing before we start getting into what the package looks like, the OECD average, the UK is always lagging behind the average quite considerably. So we had to catch up just with our European peers, let alone other international examples. So we had to catch up, not just at an individual level, but at a nation level in terms of number of hours to recover. So next, please, Bob. So in terms of closures over lockdown, the average closure days was around 60 days. England for just over 40, although some other sources like the Oxford COVID-19 tracker showed that it was much longer, and that the UK closures were second only to Italy in Europe. So we've got quite a long way to catch up. Next, please, Bob. So OECD also said that digital learning environments tend to be better suited to academic learning than practice-orientated learning, which obviously isn't entirely true, but solutions are obviously can be very well suited to practice, to theoretical learning. And some countries gave vocational education a priority when it came to recovering from lost learning. And in some countries, virtually an entire year of instruction was lost, especially where workshop time was considered. Next slide, please, Bob. So when it comes to what DFE have said, the department has said that the recovery time lost. So the time lost was up to two months for years 8 and 9. So obviously students then coming for years 7, and students coming in to years 8 and 9 were also really badly affected. So we'll see those students coming in into our colleges in the future. There are certain regions like the Northeast and Yorkshire and Humber that were really badly impacted due to the differing lockdowns in different parts of the country, and also maths was a particular area where it wasn't where lost learning was being reported anecdotally, but the estimates were not as easy, and obviously lost learning could be up to 3 months in schools. Post 16, there's been much less evidence collected other than what the AoC has undertaken, and we'll just on the next slide, please, Bob, show you what lost learning looked like. So we surveyed all of our members, and members said that 3/4 of 16 to 18-year-olds and and 69% of adults were performing well below their normal expectations. And then on the next slide, we showed that again, 3/4 of 16 to 18-year-olds and 71% of adults are between 1 to 4 months behind. It was about actually 2.6 was the average, so quite significantly behind, and that was worse for vocational learners than it was for those doing academic studies. So again, next please, Bob. So what we decided to do was to collect as much data that we could from both the ILR and from BKSB assessments. So in terms of the ILR, we looked at the English and maths grades and also the high grades of everybody on vocational and academic courses. And you can see that over the past few years, English and maths high grades, so what I mean by that is obviously 9 to 4 grades, have considerably risen upwards. So the grade profile is very different because the assessment profile is very different. It's the same for English and on the next slide as it is for maths. So it's clearly the change in assessment method has had a big impact on the grades that learners are getting, and that somewhat hides what the lost learning is hard to detect just from the GCSE data. In addition to that, we don't have the examiner reports to be able to break down the detail of what areas of learning learners have slipped back in. So we can't tell whether they've got worse at fractions, for example. So we need to then dig into other assessment methods, and that's why we spoke to colleagues at BKSB and others about what evidence there was of lost learning. So moving on then, we looked at high grades, and we took the largest qualification. So any qualification that had more than 1,000 enrolments in the latest R14, and this only closed a few weeks ago, so it's really recent data. And you can see on the graph, if you read from the right to the left, that those that have had lower grades have risen quite considerably in 2021, and fewer learners are getting higher grades at the top end of that year, and it's partly to do with the fact that we've moved to RQF qualifications, and it's partly due to the fact that learners are not able to access the higher grades due to lost learning. So we also know that this has affected learners that are more disadvantaged, and that learners that have lower English and maths grades as well. So next slide, please, Bob. So disadvantaged learners impacted those that have poor English and maths grades. The entry profile has obviously stayed very same across the years, and those that have come in with neither maths nor English have gotten really poor results. So we really need to need to look at those that have weak English and maths, as well as those that have not served well on their main course. So next again, please, Bob. So in terms of looking at maths, looking at lost learning, we spoke to BKSB to look at what was happening with their assessments, and it's an absolutely huge data set that allows us to interrogate where people how people have done on various subject specialisms within the functional skills curriculum. So I'm going to hand over to Bob, who's going to speak quickly about the methodology and what we did and what the results are starting to say. Over to you, Bob.
Yeah, so at BKSB, what we've been working on over the last few years is really solving the problem, which is how do we compare assessments which might be made up of different questions, and this allows BKSB to be an adaptive assessment so that each student gets a different set of questions. As chance would have it, that same approach to looking at assessment and calculating results allowed us to do reasonably good analysis over the 3 years that looking at, so 2018, 19, 20, 20 and 21. And so what we did is we took all of the data that we've collected in that period, and we recalculated all the results using the same algorithms, using the same question parameters, so that we could factor out any changes in those and ensure that that we were comparing like with like. and we spread those results over a range of -3 to 3, and map those across sort of what would be sort of the functional skills levels that sort of the BKSP would use, where -3 is pre-entry and 3 is a kind of a theoretical level 3, which is effectively sort of somebody who really ought to be sort of moving beyond sort of functional skills. We also had a look at the pass rates to have a look at sort of what was actually happening in each of the sort of the subject areas. So we looked at wider modules such as number, measure, shape, and space, but we also sort of drilled down to sort of kind of more topic levels such as fractions, decimals, and percentages to have a look at what movement there was in those areas. Looking at the profile for sort of like for English, actually the sort of like the 3 years do not sort of like show sort of like any real significant sort of like changes between the three, and the movement sort of like appeared to sort of like look like the sort of the standard movement you'd have sort of like between years anyway. But for maths, we have sort of like slightly sort of different profile, and I think this sort of like kind of sort of showed up sort of like what we were starting to believe was happening, and we can see that there's a shift towards people coming out higher. But actually, at the same time, there's a significant number of students that are being sort of left behind. So the shift from the sort of like the center point from the 0 up to 3 is moving towards the 3. But actually, sort of like those students that are kind of below 0 are not actually sort of like moving very much. They're actually they're actually staying there. So in many ways, what we're seeing is an improvement across the board. But that improvement is really being driven by the higher end students, and the lower end students are actually sort of like being left behind slightly. We had a look at some of the pass rates for questions. Unfortunately, sort of in the edit, sort of some of these sort of slides have been sort of being missed out. So what we can see here is sort of like is the number of assessments being taken, and this is quite an important sort of factor, because one of the things that we considered that might be hiding some of the changes in the data is we suspect that sort of like that a lot more students are taking BKSP initial assessments this year than they did in previous years. And I think this chart as shows you that sort of like for most ability groups, there's been a significant increase in the number of students actually taking BKSP. And so to a certain extent, that will also drive those results to the right. So we're seeing improvement, and is that improvement actually being driven by more students taking BKSP? So students that wouldn't traditionally do BKSP assessments because they wouldn't be normally on functional skills courses are taking BKSP because the college wants to test students on entry in the absence of a GCSE result. And bear in mind that we cut off the 2021 data 2 weeks into September. So actually the 2021 data is of half of that compared to 2019, and yet we've seen almost sort of like twice a doubling of the amount of data in those years in that year. So I think what we're looking at is probably sort of like 3 to 4 times more students have taken BKSP this year than would have done it in sort of like previous years. And that has had sort of like some sort of factors, but we can't really kind of prove what types of students were doing BKSP. We just know that a lot more were. So we suspect that might have sort of like clouded some of the results. But what we did see, I mean, this slide sort of like kind of echoes that. But what we did see when we looked at sort of like all these topic areas, that we did see that sort of that the pass rates for sort of like the lower end students went down, and the pass rates for the higher end students went up. And you could quite clearly see a split at the 0 point, where 0 and above, the pass rates were going up, and -1 down, the pass rates were going down. And this really sort of reinforces the sort of like the anecdotal sort of information that we're getting, that sort of like that suggests that the loss, that the damage is being done at sort of like that end, and that some people are being left behind.
So Bob, I'll summarise sort of from here on the next slide. So
yeah, great.
Every piece of evidence that we've got shows that the low attaining learners have lost a lot of learning. They've moved significantly backwards. The middle attaining learners have moved back, but albeit very, very slightly, almost undetectable. And then the high attaining learners have actually accelerated quite considerably, to the point where actually they're at the macro level, they are smoothing out what the lost learning, but obviously at the individual level, the lost learning, it can be quite severe, and that really only counts the sort of academic vocational and the maths and English piece, that we all know, because we don't need to do any research to show that there's masses lost in terms of social interactions, professional skills and attitudes, all of those sorts of things and employer facing learning. It's all been lost. So what we really need and what we've got is a universal next slide, please, Bob, if you can filter through, so that we need a universal offer. We need an offer that is for everybody, because although there are some regions like Yorks and Humber and East of England and North East where they are further behind, we know that it has affected absolutely everybody. It's affected English and maths. It's affected the main aim. One other thing that we want to say about our research and research of others actually in other countries is that it's too early to tell the extent to which lost learning is hitting us, because we think that it will come through a bit later into the systems and cycle. The thing that really I think is very important is that it doesn't. The lost learning is huge, and it's going to be very difficult for us to deliver on, because there are huge staffing issues, and technology has to play a part in our strategies to be able to help recover lost learning. I'm sure Karen will agree that the issue of staffing came up in literally every session at our annual conference this week, whether it was a session about staffing or not. And so we expect the study hours to be to be used in line with existing study program flexibilities that will allow for a certain proportion of digital learning. So it has to practically be part of the core solution. And strategically, we think people are making those moves anyway. So we expect it to have play a very big part in the years to come. And that's us.
David, Bob, thank you so much for sharing this kind of really, really important piece of research and insight. And a couple of things kind of really stand out for me, and it's and I think leads to the discussion. So, some of the data is skewing the impact on the individual, and how can tech help unpick all that so we can deliver to individuals. I think this idea of a long tail of impact, this is a really long term challenge we've got to address, and there are learners in the pipeline, so to speak, who are in different places in their kind of educational career, being impacted in different ways. And and as you say, it's not just educational attainment, it's all the other things that sit around you in life that mean that you can flourish in learning. So I'm really interested in two things, really. I'm really interested from in the comment section to hear anyone from other parts of the UK or in Europe, whether this data really resonates with them, and really to go to Karen, really with my first question, how can tech help?
So I was just going to make a comment for colleagues in other parts of the UK, because I don't profess to have any expertise in terms of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but just having a look at some of the data, and I was particularly struck by the Welsh data, which actually shows that attainment has dropped at the lower levels and not at the higher levels, which has some sort of comparisons with the things that David and others have talked about. In Scotland, I was very taken with the fact that their approach seems to be on progress. Where does somebody go next, rather than the outcome of what they've got and support for mental health. I think for me, in terms of how technology can help, I think technology's always been able to help with learning and pedagogy if you use it effectively as a tool in your toolkit as a teacher or an organisation. It isn't an end in its own right. And I think there's a danger that some organisations think of, they've got the kit, they've got the apps, they've been on Teams or Zoom, and therefore we've cracked technology. And I think for me, technology has to be a key tool in what I would call assessment for learning. And I think assessment for learning is something that, you know, when I was in my earlier stages of my career in education, was talked about a lot from both a formative and a summative approach in terms of assessment. But if you think about the power of technology to, you know, look at where somebody is at the moment, to assist in bridging the gap in their learning, or even extending and stretching learning, and then identifying progress, I think it's an incredibly powerful tool. So my advice always to any organisation, wherever they are, is to think about how are you integrating technology into your overall strategy, and it isn't something that should be separate. And I think the more we can do that, the more that places us in a better place to say, well, you know, we try and invest in classrooms and resources and our teachers. Our technology is just one of those parts of that toolkit, and we need to mainstream it. Now, obviously, the pandemic has, you know, in effect, accelerated things, and we need to capitalise on that acceleration and actually you know, really think as organisations, how are we using this in that sort of effective and strategic way? That's it from me.
Thank you, Karen. That's really interesting insight from, you know, the perspective of leading a college. Scott, in terms of your experience at Basingstoke and other organisations you work with, how do we build that long-term momentum that Karen's described, and what would you offer? People in the audience, things to think about to do this successfully?
So, in terms of that long-term sustainable approach, what we've done at the college I work at, Basingstoke College of Technology, and like Karen, we're available to help any schools and colleges with support as part of the EdTech Demonstrator Programme. What we've done is 6 years ago, we baked in 1 hour of independent digital learning on all courses. Level 2 hair, Level 3 engineering, Level 1 specialist provision learners who learn differently. Every single course had 1 hour. It wasn't just our academic learning subjects, as it were, that are purportedly better in this independent digital learning. It was people who learn differently and didn't always work swimmingly, but you know what, they need those independent study skills, and we've learned that over the last 18 months or so, it's fair to say. The ability to be able to be proactive and to forage and combine and to create learning is something that we witness in our learners every single week. Some people witness it in their children, as Karen will no doubt share with us at some point. Hopefully, sure, it's a wonderful story you shared in the bit before we started, Karen. Many of our learners are learning this way anyway, and shame on us if we don't adapt and lean into that and listen. Podcasts, vloggers, social media influencers, dare I say it, on an academic conference webinar like this, they're putting us to shame in terms of engagement, and shame on us for not engaging our learners as much. And I feel that guilt quite a bit. So in answer to the question, Louise, about how we might do it, I think we can listen and learn from a lot of the ways that our young people are engaging with vloggers, podcasters, social media influencers, and other forms of engaging online learning, all the while recognizing it is never a replacement for the human, engaging, mentoring, knee-to-knee in the classroom relationship. That electric live experience where you're doing the practical or your hands-on lessons. It's just an augmentation, a tool, as Karen says, that can enhance the live part of it. And I think through planning and strategy, we can free up time for more of those live electric learning experiences in the classroom if we leverage technology for the theory, for the understanding of some of the key principles, for engaging videos or how-to guides. I think by using tools like our English and maths team did in particular, with how-to whiteboarding lessons and interactive self-marking videos, and in one instance, VR experiences in construction, or even, dare I say it, TikTok videos from our hair and beauty department, giving to their students to practice technique and then share it back. I think leveraging these tools can actually free up more time for the classroom and the timetabled traditional lesson.
And that sounds like a really important point. I mean, David, I wanted to ask you, your final slide talked about the impact on staffing and the need for more staff, but also learners are obviously a super important part of the picture here. This is why we're all in it. But teachers and trainers, they need the tools and the resources to be able to deploy and deliver what we need them to deliver. What do you think, David, tech has the potential in terms of helping resolve some of these staffing challenges that you talked about?
So we know that there are particular areas where there are problems. So the trades, in particular, there's a real shortage, but there's a problem in terms of staffing with LSAs, with English and maths tutors. It's across the board, and we need to invest in our human infrastructure, in our technological infrastructure, and we need to support students all at the same time. So I think government need to step up. We had the Get Help with Tech scheme, which was actually a pretty well implemented policy. I've got very little criticism, which is not normal for me, around a government policy. That they invested a lot and actually did quite well to deliver. So we need to get devices in the hands of the disadvantaged and not just do it for COVID, but mainstream that. We need to invest in staff from a CPD perspective, because if staff don't have the skills that they need, then I really worry. But obviously institutions themselves need to invest in all forms of infrastructure, and if we don't get that right, then I really worry that we won't be able to deliver the hours that we need to for education recovery.
And Karen, in your college, how's tech supporting you to be able to deliver those hours, or to gear up to be able to deliver them on a sustainable basis, moving from a sort of a COVID emergency to mainstreaming this, I suppose?
So I think, to be fair, and I suspect Scott would probably say a similar thing, that as organisations, both our colleges had made a strategic decision to invest in technology a long time before the pandemic. And so therefore for us, 7 years ago, we made a decision to invest in our Wi-Fi infrastructure and a one-to-one device scheme, which the college pays for students. And we did that on the basis of looking at the technology that we had that was fixed, looking at what we could take away, because in effect, most of it was being used for 10 minutes in every hour. And access to technology was the biggest thing that we had student complaints about. So we actually looked at an initial lump sum investment and then a rolling investment where we took away fixed technology infrastructure in places where we didn't need it. And we did that because at the time we recognized that the world was a sort of changing place. It's always incredibly difficult to keep up, but that set us in really good stead for for the pandemic, because we'd already, in effect, our disadvantaged learners all had devices. We'd worked through some of those issues about having internet access and all of those other things. I think, my sort of advice to any organisation is to think about the world, if that makes sense, and technology is there. The world is a very different world for young people and for adults to the world, 10, 20, 50, however many years ago. And I mean, I was yesterday in a meeting which was discussing the whole agenda around sexual harassment and peer-on-peer sexual abuse. And we were having a discussion about the fact that young people now, meet somebody they like on Snapchat. They've seen a photo of them. They have lots of conversations. They might decide they want to meet them or send them a photograph. And we, as educators, have got to learn about that world and, use the young people that we work with to better prepare them for how do we keep them safer? How do we get them to navigate all of that information that's thrown at them? How do we get them to, filter information? And the story I was telling in the pre-meeting for this to Scott was I have twins that have just turned 11. One of my twins has taught himself how to program his own virtual reality worlds in an app called Blender, a piece of software. It's quite sophisticated, so he can put it onto his virtual reality headset himself, completely from influencers on YouTube who drive me mad because I can hear them all talking in the morning. But that's the world that, and that's fundamentally different to my students I have here now. Those are the sort of 10, 11-year-olds coming through the system. So, I think I would reinforce what Scott said. We've got to try and understand it and work with our students and use them as a source to help us and to help staff and to help teachers. But the leadership really has to come from the top of the organisation, and a passion for, recognising that technology is everywhere. How do we harness its power for good, if that makes sense?
Scott, you wanted to add something to that? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm back. Love that story, Karen. That's lovely.
I'm so relieved that a digital lead can also forget to take their mute off as well. It's given me great comfort.
Me rolling my eyes earlier on at one of us who forgot to turn their mic off. And anyway, I learned from a mistake. I adapted. I love that story, Karen. That's wonderful. That's indicative of what's to come, I suppose, as you say, but in the next few years in terms of that generation. We've been working with students for 6 years now as student digital leaders. Every inset day, we had an inset day on Wednesday, actually, and the new generation did it. 8 student digital leaders who are given different lanyards, a free lunch every week. They help us out. They go into staff rooms and classrooms with me, and we train up the students and staff on how to use technology. They are able to connect with a lot of staff that I can't get through to and connect with in many instances. And they are able to help us to disseminate and to support at a quicker speed as well. And also, we've, in the last 6 years, created a pathway for them to join us in an apprenticeship as a learning technologist and to eventually be employed by the college if they're successful. We currently have Sky and Holly in our team as senior learning technologists in their early 20s, but they're senior learning technologists now, and they've come from being 16 through to being learning technologists. And Jay and Amara are current apprentices who are supporting our student digital leaders. We've also adapted our library team to become learning facilitators who look after the independent flipped learning hour. And that estate that wasn't being used particularly well now sees all the students come through for that independent hour each week, where we help them with their independent digital study skills they've been set by their teacher. So that's woven into the fabric of the curriculum, as it were. Ian in the comments says something interesting about looking at tech to support networks learning as well, and that reference to work experience I suppose hasn't come up too much yet. And you're absolutely right, Ian. We had an Ofsted online review back last year, and we also had a visit from them, look at a pilot inspection recently as well. And that is something that absolutely, and quite rightly, Ofsted are very hot on, and with the rise of T levels as well, and also just the evolution of further education in general, that alignment with our community, our industries, and making sure that our courses are sponsored or whether they are co-designed alongside said small to medium enterprises, charities, non-profits, businesses, whoever it might be, really leads that authenticity in the way that we move forward, I think. And that's something that, along with empathy mapping and sitting with the students, listening to what they want, how they learn, that's massively valuable. We also need to think about the other side of things as well, which is that industry need expectation for each respective sector, and ensuring that our schemes of work, as it were, are fit for purpose.
Hey, thanks. It's really helpful to hear your kind of practical experiences, and I think after following up this webinar, I think we're going to send participants out links to bits of information and things where people can kind of find out more what you've done. And I think there's quite a lot on the EdTech demonstrator site as well, isn't there, from both Harlow and Basingstoke and others. I just wanted to loop back to something that kind of was in one of the stats, and I think it also probably links to maybe the staff time. And Bob, the point you made about the overall picture being skewed because the higher attainers are attaining more quickly, but the lower attainers seem to be going backwards. How in FE, do you see technology being able to support that analysis and differentiation so that the learners are getting kind of what they need when they need it?
Well, I think obviously having seen what I do, sort of my kind of background is very much sort of data and data science approach. And one thing that's sort of that's jumped out at me throughout this whole process was just, and maybe David will agree with me, was just how difficult it was to find out what was going on. And I think that's something that from an FE point of view we really need to be mindful of. We collect an awful lot of data around students in terms of just the stuff that BKSP does, but the BKSP is just a tiny part of the ecosystem. There's e-portfolio systems, there's all sorts of all these other systems harvesting all this data about students all of the time. And I don't think we actually really make an awful lot of use of it, other than to audit that somebody's done something. But yeah, there's so much more that can be done with that data, and so I think Karen was talking earlier about assessment to look at where gaps are and to facilitate learning. But we have data sets which are almost national. We should be able to say that the students have got these gaps generally fill those gaps quicker when they take this approach or that approach. And not necessarily that shouldn't necessarily be a driver, but it should be a piece of information that could be made available to somebody to say that students with similar gaps generally improve better when they take this path or this path. And I think that helps people to make decisions about how best to fill those gaps. I think there's the next step. It's the first step is identifying that there is a gap. The next step is is advising on what is the best way to fill that gap. And I think that's really the next phase for FE is to really start using that data to do more than just to flag that there's a hole here. I think we really ought to be moving on to there's a hole here. How's the best way to fill that hole? Yeah, I think that's really really where we should be aiming to go next.
It's really interesting, isn't it? We had a breakout session in the showcase this week. Well, there was two that talked. This one was on data and ethics, and part of the discussion was moving the discussion on from data analytics to getting learner insights and using that as part of your kind of user-centric design process to make the right choices to help help learners develop in the best way possible. And a similar discussion in the assessment one. I was struck about some of the. I'm just trying to catch up on some comments in the chat for the last 5 minutes. But before I did, I wanted to just open up the discussion a bit about the broader environment that students need and teachers to be able to catch up and flourish. And one of the projects we supported is First Pass and Ada at Bolton College, and it'd be good to know your views, Scott first and then Karen, on how things like chatbots can support learners, and that kind of where you see the future of that kind of support going?
I was skeptical, to be honest with you. Yeah, that was mine. And as much as people think I'm hyper techy and very digital, I don't much care about technology for technology's sake. It's very much a tool, as Karen says. It frees up more time for me to do the bit of the job I actually care about, the human interaction. That said, the way the guys at Bolton have leveraged that tool to take away administrative tasks, to free up more time for those human interactions, yeah, I get it, completely understand the benefits of that. We use Century Tech, maths and English tool, which does much the same thing with our maths and English lessons. The students get a personalised dashboard from this diagnostic tool, which identifies their skills gaps where they need to focus. And when they arrive for the lessons, the physical live lessons, as it were, they're streamlined into bespoke, smaller sessions with teachers to coach them through algebra or through similes and metaphor, whatever it is that we've identified as being the area that needs to be worked on as a pressing matter. So I can completely see the benefit of that, so long as we're conscious, I suppose, about the intentions of the algorithm, I suppose, as much as we can ever be. Conscious about it, and the intent behind it is just something we need to be skeptical about as to why we're doing it. With that on that point, actually, I think that's something in the next 5 to 10 years my career is going to be real focus. Being mindful of the algorithm, whether it be the chatbot from the college reception or whether it be the Instagram feed that is pushing things towards me that are increasingly sticky and difficult to put down. We've got a well-being strategy at the college, which I'm very happy to share for free, and a well-being module we've created to help students manage their screen time, and also tutorial slides and other resources, apps, recommendations, because we are focused on making sure that we use tech mindfully, because this is the big challenge, I think, for the next decade.
Yeah, I'll go to Karen and then to David, because you're absolutely right. We're all interested in tech for good, not tech for tech's sake, and it has to be at the heart of how we choose which technology solutions can help us on the way. So Karen.
So I was going to say I have the same healthy skepticism as Scott, and I think there's a lot of information at the moment coming out of. I've read some of the stuff in the US about how AI has been used in the legal system and actually programmed into the system is a default bias. So I think we do have to have a healthy skepticism, and I don't think there are the international set of systems and controls and legislature that actually assists us in controlling that. So as educators, we've got a responsibility to work on those things. Again, I've seen the ADA side of things. Anything that can, free up administrative time, I think is a brilliant thing. But I think what we've got to do is give students the ability to navigate all sorts of different information. And I think there is a danger if we over-invest in particular approaches that, we see it at the moment. They think that, the internet is the answer to everything. And the news that they read is accurate. And of course, they could, the more you like something, the more it's pushed at you. So you get your own view parroted back at you more and more. And as Scott said, that becomes addictive. I personally spend far too long on Instagram looking at clothes, and then I think I need to buy things. And I mean, I'm an adult and I understand that is happening to me. So I just think we need to find the right balance as educators with it. What I would be really interested in, and I've not really seen anything that I think works well on this front, is how do we support young people with practical learning? And I mean, we do things like video things so they can watch things, but I've not seen anything that I think is fantastic on, real hands-on practical learning in that technology space. And I'm not talking simulation in a virtual reality headset. So that for me, I think, is a big missing gap. Scott's desperate to come in. He's waiting.
Scott's desperate, and David is too. So again, quickly to Scott and then to David.
No, only some things, Karen. I'm happy to catch up with you about this and anyone else about it as well. But in terms of, funnily enough, I was going to say VR, and then you said not VR. I was going, oh God, I put my hand up. But I've seen VR used really well in that regard, Karen. Like Wrench VR, to take apart an engine, photorealism of the actual parts and putting it together before they actually get hands on with the physical engine for a limited amount of time. And public services students diffusing terrorist situations or identifying threats in a 360 space before they go and do their physical tests. And also even guys like in construction doing health and safety tests in VR before they actually get on site and have to do their actual health and safety tests, and electrical exams as well, doing that in a simulated space, freeing up time and helping them practice has been useful. But like you say, it's not the solution.
I think my observation is I'm seeing it used when it shouldn't be used, if that makes sense, for the sake of using it. So I saw a virtual reality house with wiring. To be honest, that
I think that's the key.
Stimulate. So I think it's that sort of test.
It's
and I think that's one of the.
Absolutely.
It's going to be one of the, in terms of building this momentum and the embedding tech in our strategies, having the skills to make the right choices about what the right solutions are is I think part of the challenge that we've got to work towards, rather than tech for tech's sake. I'm going to go to David, because I think you had your hand up a while ago and you've been super patient. So look back to you.
Thanks. I just want to build on a couple of things that Karen and Scott said. We've got lots of great people in the sector, and I love listening to Scott. I love listening to all of the people at Karen's college, all the digital evangelists, all the technologists that know how to do this. And I would say that where there is a big difference in their colleges is that they have a good sense of what how digital pedagogy works. Not just about the tech, and not technology first. They really know how to and when to use digital tools and how the digital pedagogies work. And I think that we need to invest much more in our staff in a subject-specific way. So I'd like to see more sort of infrastructure and support for our teachers in that regard. The other thing that I'd like to mention is the sort of from a mindfulness perspective, both from a mental health, from a teacher perspective and from a student perspective. Students are assessed, to such a high level at the moment, aren't they? I mean, they did lots of BKSB assessments, didn't they? We were hearing that they've done lots of BKSB assessments. They're examining lots. They've had lots of exams, even despite the fact that the exams were closed down. In fact, more and the workload that's been levied and downloaded onto staff. It was devolved, wasn't it, from the centre all the way down to teachers. And we've got to be mindful of making students' lives better and staff. We cannot devolve more. They have a lot of pressure on them already. We cannot devolve more responsibility. So we've got to use technology where it can improve matter, and like Karen said, take administrative tasks away. So I'm really keen to hear from anybody and how we can improve those two things.
No, thank you, David. We've got kind of 5 minutes left, so I just want to, before we kind of wrap up, just kind of go around to everyone. And there was one sort of key thing you'd like to leave with the audience. I'm going to start with you, Bob. I don't know, is that unfair? I haven't given you a chance to think about it, but if on this topic, if there's one thing you wanted to kind of share, what would it be quickly?
I mean, I think I kind of more or less sort of covered it when we spoke about it before, and I think really sort of the experience that I've had with David has shown that The quality of the data that we collect is vital. We may find ourselves in this situation again at some point further along down the line. We didn't see this happening, and next time we ought to be better prepared for it. So that quality of data, the data that we collect, its validity, its accuracy, its adaptability, so the ability to be able to compare one set with another set. I know it's not it's probably not really what this the theme for this audience is. It's kind of the stuff you don't see, but I think it is quite it is really important. And I'd echo actually that I agree with a lot that Karen and Scott said about the algorithm. The algorithm shouldn't be in control. It shouldn't. There's no person more skeptical about AI and machine learning than me. I'm really a pure statistician. I understand how it works. I understand the mathematics behind it. I also understand that they are not 100% 100% accurate every single time, and therefore they shouldn't actually be the single direction of travel.
Yeah.
Information should be there to inform, but the final decision should be made by people, and that's but those people will make better decisions if the quality of the information that we put in front of them is better.
I think that's a really important point in, it's a big growth area, and from what I've heard from the discussions today, it's kind of underpinning an awful lot of how you make the right choices and how you embed things in your strategy. And for those who've not seen it, the Association for Learning Technologies have got an ethical data framework that they're developing. So we might be able to pop the link in the chat, but definitely in the resources. I know they're really interested in people's comments and input into how that framework develops, because I think, Karen, you said there's no kind of really great international standards or frameworks for how we're working with data. So this piece is quite interesting from ALT. Very quickly, did anyone else before we close want to raise their hand or say anything or share anything before we close? Yeah. David? Just
very briefly, it's picking up on Ian Grading's comment, which I think I was agreeing with earlier on, that we need to really be thinking very carefully about all that we do. There are, learners get lots of assessments during their studies, and we've got to be careful that for both neurotypical and neurodiverse learners, that whatever we do, we don't do any harm or damage their motivation, and also encapsulate and drive forward their motivations if technology is the way in which they learn best. And I think that Scott spoke to that very clearly earlier on. We've got to think about inquiry-based learning, discovery-based learning. We've got to help and plug into the way young people learn. I've got a 12-year-old son that it sounds very similar to Karen's 10-year-old twins. We've got to help them learn in the way that they learn, and we need technology has to be at the centre of that.
Oh, brilliant. No, thank you. And that's a great note to finish on. And what an amazing discussion and a great way to close the week of VocTech. And I think we could probably go on sharing and talking about this topic for hours and hours. So please do, in the audience, we're really keen to continue this conversation and make sure you engage with UFI on social or for our community newsletter, to keep this conversation going, because we're totally focused and passionate on how we can support the adoption of the very best technology to support adult learners. And we kind of firmly believe, which was really the stand-up message for this session for me, that the human and the machine are in it together. It's not either or, it's how we do that together. So I want to say thank you to David, Scott, to Karen, to Bob, and to everybody across our community who's engaged with the week of VocTech. Have a great weekend and see you all soon. Bye-bye.